Today we're going to talk about virtual machines, and then we're going to actually install one on our Server 2012 machine. So if you don't have Server 2012 on your machine, I suggest you maybe pause this and go get that installed and then come back. So those of you that are still with us, a virtual machine. The technical definition from techopedia.com, which is one of my favorite sites to go to if I don't know something, says, and I'm going to read off the site because I want to get this right. A virtual machine is a software program or operating system that not only exhibits the behavior of a separate computer, but is also capable of performing tasks such as running applications and programs like a separate computer. A virtual machine, usually known as a guest, is created within another computing environment referred to as a host. Multiple virtual machines can exist within a single host at one time. So, what does all that mean? Basically, for instance, with what we're going to do with Server 2012, we installed Hyper-V on Server 2012. So Hyper-V is a virtual machine manager. It manages virtual machines. So what we're going to do is we're going to put multiple virtual machines there, and Hyper-V can manage all those. We can put Windows 8 on there. We could put a Linux machine on there. We could put Windows 10 on there all at once. It's kind of cool. So that's pretty much what it does. So let's see some advantages of virtual machines. You can like it says, you can put multiple operating systems, of course. They're widely available. They're easy to manage and maintain. And then they also offer disaster recovery options. There are some disadvantages and some drawbacks. Some of those are they aren't as efficient as physical machines. You will notice when we get into using them, they're sometimes can be a little bit kind of laggy, slow sometimes. And that's because the hardware resources, they're distributed indirectly. It's not, directly plugged in, connected, that kind of a thing. The multiple VMs running on a single physical machine, because if you have lots of machines running, the performance can be a little unstable. So, and you may run into that too, and some of that will depend on how you allocate your hardware. So we'll talk about that as we install and all that stuff too. When you do install, the installation is, you install the software just like you would on a regular physical computer. You would do it with like a CD, a DVD, or with an ISO image, or even if you have, like an operating system on a thumb drive. Let's go to our actual computer and install a virtual machine. Now we're going to actually install the virtual machine on our server. First thing we actually need to do though is obtain software for that. I have a software folder. I have already obtained my software. I got it from our file share server in our lab. I can show you where you can get that. You come in here to your start menu like so and just type run, and then // and then put in the IP address of the file share server, and you might double check to see that it's still the same. The logical network topology might still be up on the board. You can probably find out from somebody what the IP address is for the file share server, and just type in that IP address and then click OK, and it'll open it up. So here it is. Here's the ISOs folder. Double click that, and here's all your ISOs. Once you get your software, then we just need to go into our Hyper-V manager, which, if you remember, is under this tools thing up here. There's our Hyper-V manager. And then once you're there, over here on the right is new, and just click virtual machine. And there's always this before you begin page on most of these wizards. I always just click next through it. Once you're here, then you name your virtual machine. I usually just name them whatever operating system that I'm actually installing, just so I keep track of what I'm doing. If I do 2 of the same operating system, I'll put something slightly different to distinguish that. So Windows 7, I don't mess with the location of it, I just leave that. So click Next. I don't mess with the generation of it, I leave the default there. So next. The memory. I always leave the startup memory at 512 megabytes. And then I check the box to use dynamic memory for the virtual machine. If you use static memory, basically for a virtual machine, then it will always start the machine with that much memory. If you were to allocate 2 gigs of memory to your machine, then it would always use 2 gigs of memory. Never more, never less. When you use dynamic memory, then it starts up with 512. If it needs more, then it gives it more. For example, if you have a system with only 8 gigs of RAM, if you were to put 4 virtual machines on it and allocate 2 gigabytes of RAM to each one statically, then you wouldn't have any left for the host. So if you allocate 512 megabytes of RAM dynamically, you'd be fine. That's the reason for the dynamic memory. The networking, I usually wait and configure it afterward, so just click Next there. The next one is the virtual hard disk, and this is where the only thing you really need to change in here is the size of the hard drive, because as of right now it has it at 127 gigabytes, and I don't think you want one virtual machine taking up 127 gigabytes of your physical hard drive. What I usually do is I make sure I find out what the minimum requirement is for each operating system that I'm going to put on my machine is, and obviously I need to make sure I know how much space I really physically have on my machine. For this, I think with Windows 7, we'll do 50. We don't do a whole lot with this stuff, so this is more than enough. And then that's all you really need to do there, is just make sure you don't put 120 something gigabytes. So click Next. The install options is where you're going to choose your ISO file. So we're going to click the install an operating system from a bootable CD/DVD-ROM, and then we're going to click down here, image file, and then we'll click browse, and then go and find wherever you saved your ISO images. I saved mine out here in that software folder, and I'm doing Windows 7, so I clicked that, and then it's in there, so then I click Next. And the last page is just your summary of everything you've chosen. You want to make sure, double check, got your name that you want. Want to make sure your memory starts there, and you can change some of this stuff once it's all done too. When you're done, just click Finish. It'll configure and create. And then you'll see up here, I have a new virtual machine. Now it's not quite done yet, because it's created, but it's not installed, because we haven't done the whole install thing like you would with a normal computer. So if you'll notice, the state here is off. So if you double click it, it opens up in a new window here, and then you've got all these fun little buttons across the top. One right here, this is your start button. So if you click that, it actually, it's just like your start button on your computer. It turns your computer on. So it'll start Windows up, and it will start the installation process. And all it really is, you have a mouse inside. When you click out here, you notice my mouse turns back to my big gigantic pointer that I have, so you can see it a little better. When I click in here, you notice it's the smaller, because that is when I'm actually inside the virtual machine. Right now we would go through and do your basic install. So click Install Now, and you can make this full screen if you click Maximize, but it doesn't really get much bigger right now. It will later. So you gotta accept, click Next. With this, even though you've got to, just click Next, and then it'll go through the install just like any other computer, and we get to sit and watch. After everything comes back, then it's going to ask for a username, computer name. You're going to set up your password. I always do the lab password. That way if anybody needs to get in to my virtual machines, they can. And then at the hint, I put lab pass, so they'll automatically know what it is. Just your typical stuff. And then here's the big thing right here that I really wanted to show you was, again, the product key. And that's where that DreamSpark book is going to come in handy. And so you're going to need to remember to go and hunt that book down. Usually it's sitting by Mrs. Todd's computer. Sometimes somebody uses it, forgets to put it back, so you might have to look around the lab a little bit to try and find it. Use recommended settings. Set your date and time for Central. It'll finalize your settings. And that's pretty much it. Then you have a virtual machine ready to go. And it's Windows 7 on top of Server 2012. When you go back to your Hyper-V Manager, some things to notice. Then now you've got a lot more going on up here. You've got your Windows 7 machine. The state of it, it's running. It tells you the CPU usage, the assigned memory. And then if you go down here, if you actually click down on these buttons here, if you click on the memory button, this tells you what is actually going on with it. So if you want to know the summary, what's going on, what's happening with the memory right now, this is the maximum memory it can use. This is the minimum memory. Dynamic memory is enabled. Over here on the right, you've got, this is your actual server. That's Sirius, that's the name of my server. And then Windows 7, that's my virtual machine there. These are kind of shortcut buttons to do things. When you can also come over here and right click on that and you get the same things as you get over here. So you can connect to it, you can get the settings, you can turn it off, shut it down, do all the same things over here as you could also do by right clicking it over there. Now that you know the basics to set up a virtual machine on Hyper-V, you can continue getting another Windows machine set up and even get a virtual server 2012 set up so that you can finish out your lab tasks for your networking class.